The sound came first. A sharp clatter, metal against porcelain, cutting through the low hum of conversation. I looked up from my plate just in time to see Sophia's hand still raised, the silver spoon she had flung now rocking on the edge of the china bowl. Her voice followed, slicing clean through the air. Your cooking tastes like trash. No wonder nobody reads your old recipes. For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. The dining room seemed to shrink, pulling in the walls and pressing the air out of my chest. The roasted lamb, seasoned with rosemary I had clipped from the small garden behind the house, sat cooling in the center of the table. Its aroma, earthy, comforting, turned suddenly sour in my throat. I waited for someone to laugh, to soften the blow. But no one did. Daniel, my son, 42 years old now, his hair already thinning at the temples, lowered his eyes. He didn't look at me, didn't look at his wife. His fingers tightened around the stem of his wine glass. The silence between us was louder than her insult. I could hear the ticking of the wall clock above the sideboard. Tick, tick, tick. Each beat like a hammer against the cage of my ribs. I wanted to ask her to repeat herself, to give her the chance to take it back. But Sophia's face remained impassive, smug even, her mouth curving into the faintest smile. Her lipstick, a shade too red for the occasion, left a print on the rim of her glass. The spoon she had discarded rolled off the bowl and clattered onto the hardwood floor. Nobody moved to pick it up. I sat frozen. My fork was halfway to my mouth, a slice of lamb cooling on its tines. My hand trembled, and I lowered it slowly back to the plate. It wasn't just her words. It was the way Daniel didn't defend me, didn't say, "That's enough, Sophia." He kept his eyes on his wine, as if the dark swirl in the glass were more worthy of his attention than the mother who had carried him, fed him, financed every rung of the ladder he climbed. And then, another sound. A vibration in my pocket, the dull buzz of my phone against my ribs. I fumbled for it, grateful for the distraction, desperate for something, anything that wasn't the weight of their silence. On the screen, payment sent, 3,000 EURS. The monthly transfer, automatic, relentless. I had set it up years ago, back when I believed generosity could buy closeness, when I still mistook money for glue strong enough to hold a family together. My chest tightened. That small rectangle of glass weighed 1,000 pounds in my palm. Sophia's eyes flicked to it. She saw the notification. Her smile sharpened, though she said nothing more. She didn't need to. The message was clear. My role in this house was not mother, not grandmother, not even cook. I was a wallet with wrinkles, a tired pair of hands to stir pots and wire money. The lamb sat untouched. The vegetables cooled in their glaze. My appetite died in the pit of my stomach. I tried to swallow, but my throat burned. My own voice sounded foreign when I finally spoke, thin and papery. "Is that truly how you feel, Sophia?" She didn't hesitate. I don't sugarcoat things. Maybe someone should have told you years ago that your so-called talents aren't worth clinging to. Daniel shifted in his chair. His mouth opened, then closed again. A coward's silence. I looked around the table, the polished wood, the gleaming cutlery, the glasses catching the light from the chandelier. For decades, I had dreamed of meals like this, family gathered, children laughing, dishes steaming. I had built this scene with my labor, my sacrifices, my recipes inked on paper and published for strangers to savor. And here I was, being told my cooking was trash. My life's work, reduced to garbage in a single sentence. I felt heat rise in my face, but no tears came. Not yet. The air smelled of lamb and rosemary, but all I could taste was bitterness. Sophia reached for her glass again, the ruby wine catching the light. "Maybe it's time you stop pretending, Eleanor. Nobody cares about your old food columns. Times have changed." Her words lodged in me like shards of glass. But deeper still was the silence of my son, the boy I had fed with spoonfuls of mashed carrots, the man whose mortgages I had paid, whose debts I had erased with transfers and signatures. He sat there silent as his wife dismantled me piece by piece. The phone buzzed again with a follow-up notification. A transfer completed. I set it down beside my plate, face up, letting the glowing screen accuse me. I pressed my palms together under the table. My knuckles whitened. The spoon lay forgotten on the floor, but its echo still rang in my ears. That was the moment it sank in. Not the insult, not even the silence, but the realization that my worth to them was measured not in love or respect, but in currency. I breathed in, the air thin, metallic. I exhaled, long and shaky. And in that fragile, merciless instant, one truth crystallized, clear as the cut of a knife. That was the moment I knew I had been cast out of my own family, not because of the flavor of my food, but because of the value of a human being. When Sophia's words struck me at that dinner table, they didn't just sting in the present. They opened a floodgate to decades of giving. My mind reeled backward, dragging me through corridors of time lined with receipts, wire transfers, and late-night phone calls. I have always been meticulous with records. Even now, I can picture the red leather notebook that lives in the top drawer of my desk. Its cover has dulled with age, the corners frayed, but inside, every page bristles with neat rows of numbers. Dates, amounts, notes in my careful handwriting. S 1985, 1200 EUR, Daniel's university fees, second semester. 1889, 6,000 EUR, down payment for his first apartment in Lyon. ACES 192, 3,000 EUR, to cover medical bills when he broke his leg skiing. S 1999, 12,000 EUR, their wedding expenses, including Sophia's custom dress. Line after line, year after year, the notebook is a silent witness. By 2015, when I closed the last page, the total had climbed past 450,000 euros, nearly $500,000. My life savings poured steadily into Daniel's, like water into sand. And yet, I never thought of it as sacrifice back then. I told myself it was love. In those years, my career had been dazzling in its own right. I was a food stylist in the golden days of print magazines, before Instagram filters and viral hashtags. Editors from Paris, Rome, and Barcelona fought for my time. I traveled with crates of herbs and crates of copper pots, polishing grapes until they glistened like jewels under the studio lights. My hand-shaped shadows, my brushes coaxed shine onto roasted chickens and croissants. Later, I became a lecturer at a culinary school in Florence. My students were young, eager, wide-eyed. I taught them that food was not only nourishment, but theater, memory, seduction. My salary was generous, and the consulting fees for magazines more than doubled it. Money flowed in, so I let it flow out. When Daniel called, I answered. I remember one night in 1997, my phone ringing at 2 a.m. His voice on the line was tight, desperate. "Mom, just a little more. I promise this is the last time." I sat at the kitchen table of my Paris apartment, the city still awake beyond my window. The Seine shimmered in the distance, but my eyes stayed fixed on the red notebook open in front of me. "All right," I whispered, pen poised, "but you must take responsibility soon." I wrote the date, the amount, 4,800 euros this time, and closed the book with a sigh. The leather creaked like an old joint. Looking back, I wonder how many times I repeated that promise to myself. This is the last transfer. This is the last time. But there was always another crisis, another debt, another opportunity that needed a short bridge. In 2003, Daniel wanted to start a small import business. He called me brimming with excitement. "It's foolproof, Mom. Just 10,000 to start, and I'll pay you back in 6 months." I wired the money the same afternoon. 6 months became 6 years. By then, the business had collapsed, leaving nothing but invoices and excuses. Still, I told myself I was investing in his future, not enabling his weakness. That was the lie I fed myself with every keystroke of an online transfer. The notebook filled, numbers climbing like ivy up a wall, creeping higher and higher until they covered everything. Sometimes I would run my fingers over the ink, tracing the ridges pressed deep by my pen. The notebook was heavy, heavier than its size suggested. I imagined each euro, weighing it down, turning it into a ledger of my motherhood. And yet, the pages smelled faintly of the leather I had chosen for myself in a Barcelona market, a reminder that once I had been a woman who bought things for her own pleasure. I remembered the exact figure that broke me: 450,327 euros. That was the total after 30 years of giving. I closed the notebook, set it back in the drawer, and promised myself no more. But of course, no more became just one more. What shames me now is not only the money, but the pattern. I let it happen. I was complicit in my own depletion. Sometimes, late at night, I sit by the window with a cup of chamomile tea and whisper to myself, if I had been harder, stricter, firmer earlier, would Daniel respect me more today? Would Sophia have bitten her tongue before calling my food trash? A truth presses like a stone in my chest. If I had drawn the line sooner, maybe they would not see me as inexhaustible. But there were bright moments too, weren't there? Times when I believed the giving mattered. When Daniel would hug me after a meal and say, "Nobody cooks like you, Mom." When he called after the birth of his first child and cried into the phone, "I couldn't have done this without you." Those words are written nowhere in the notebook. Memory has no ink. But I carried them with me for years, like interest accrued on my investments. And now, gone. The red leather notebook still waits in its drawer. Sometimes, when the house is too quiet, I take it out just to hold it. The pages crinkle, the ink has faded in places, but the story it tells is indelible. I leaf through it and hear echoes of Daniel's voice. "Just this once, Mom. Things will get better, Mom. I'll pay you back soon." I see my own replies scribbled in the margins. F for rent, 2 for debt. F for school fees. It is not a ledger. It is a diary of misplaced trust. If I had been stronger, if I had been braver, perhaps my son would look at me differently today. Instead, I sit at a table where my cooking is called trash and my worth measured only in the buzz of a banking notification. And deep down, I know the truth. I helped write this script. My pen filled the notebook. My hand pressed send. The night after Sophia's insult, I sat alone in my kitchen. The house creaked with its usual sounds, the pipes settling, the refrigerator humming, but everything felt sharper, louder, as if the silence itself were accusing me. My plate from dinner was still in the sink, the lamb congealed on porcelain. I couldn't bring myself to wash it yet. Instead, I pulled my laptop onto the table, the screen's glow spilling across the wood. My fingers hovered above the keyboard. The banking app was already open. I had stared at it for weeks, sometimes months, without daring to act. The automatic transfer sat there smug and relentless. 3,000 EUR every first of the month. I placed my hands in my lap, lacing the fingers together. They trembled slightly, the way they always do now when I hold a knife too long. Age has made them frail, but tonight they felt heavier than any skillet I had ever lifted. I whispered aloud, as if speaking to the walls might steady me. "Eleanor, if you keep this up, you will disappear." The cursor blinked on the screen. Patient, unbothered. I clicked Manage Transfers. A new window opened, asking for confirmation. The words were clinical, sterile. "Do you wish to cancel this recurring payment?" Tie. I closed my eyes. Images swarmed. Daniel at 5, clutching a toy car. Daniel at 22, hugging me at the airport before leaving for London. Daniel at 38, calling again at 2 a.m., desperate for another loan. And Sophia's voice, "Your cooking tastes like trash." My stomach twisted. My hand reached for the mouse, then pulled back. I pressed my palms flat against the table, listening to my own breath quicken. Inside me, two voices argued. One whispered, "If you cancel, they will hate you. You will lose your son. Your grandchildren will drift away. You will be alone." The other whispered back, "If you don't, you will lose yourself. You already have." I thought of the red leather notebook tucked away in the drawer upstairs, its pages heavy with numbers. It was not just a record of money, it was a record of erosion. Every line, a small piece of me carved away. I lifted my hand again. The mouse felt slick in my palm. I clicked cancel. The screen asked, "Are you sure?" "Yes," I said aloud this time. My voice surprised me. It didn't shake. I typed my password, each keystroke loud as a hammer, ELEANOR. The final confirmation appeared. A recurring payment has been canceled. For a moment, nothing happened. The world didn't collapse. The room didn't catch fire. The silence was the same. But in my chest, something shifted. I sat back, exhaling so deeply it rattled my ribs. My shoulders ached as if I had been carrying stones and suddenly set them down. I touched my hands together, fingertips pressing like a prayer. My eyes stung, but still no tears came. Instead, a strange lightness seeped through me, cautious but real. That tiny click, the simplest of sounds, felt louder than Sophia's insult, louder than Daniel's silence, louder than 3 decades of excuses. I whispered again, but this time not to the walls, to myself. "This is the last time." Later, as I prepared for bed, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at me was older, yes, wrinkles carved deep, hair thinning at the crown, but her eyes looked clearer than they had in years. I touched the glass. "You're still here," I murmured. The house seemed to breathe differently that night. I slipped between the sheets, the red notebook tucked under my pillow like a talisman. My body was heavy, but my mind was strangely alert, buzzing with the enormity of what I had done. I wasn't naive. I knew Daniel would call. He would rage. He would demand. He might even threaten. But the line had been drawn, however faint. I lay in the dark, listening to the tick of the clock. For the first time in decades, the sound didn't feel like a countdown. It felt like a beginning. 3 days after I canceled the transfer, the doorbell rang. Not the polite chime they used to press when they came for Sunday lunch, but a hard, impatient buzz. I knew who it was before I opened the door. Daniel stood on my porch, jaw tight, a sheaf of papers clenched in his hand. Behind him, Sophia crossed her arms over her chest, her perfume hitting me even before she stepped inside, sharp and sweet like overripe fruit. "Mom," Daniel said, his voice already strained. "We need to talk." I stepped aside without a word. They swept past me into the living room, shoes clicking on the parquet. I had prepared tea, not because I wanted to please them, but because I needed something to do with my hands. The kettle whistled softly in the kitchen. The scent of chamomile drifted through the air. They sat on the sofa, my sofa, the one I had bought with the first big check from the magazine back in 1986. Sophia perched on the edge as if it were beneath her. Daniel hunched forward like a man on trial. I carried in the tray, set it down on the low table, and poured. The amber liquid steamed between us. Sophia didn't touch hers. She set the papers down on the table with a slap. "Sign the power of attorney," she said. "It's easier for everyone." Her tone was clipped, practiced, as if she had rehearsed it. Daniel's eyes flicked from her to me, then back again. He said nothing. I wrapped my hands around my cup. The porcelain was warm, steadying. "No," I said quietly. "My hands may tremble, but they will never sign away my dignity." The words hung there, soft but immovable, like a stone in a river. Sophia blinked. "Excuse me?" I met her gaze. "You heard me." Daniel shifted. "Mom, you're making this harder than it needs to be. We just want to help manage things. This is for your own good." I tilted my head. "My own good? That's what you call it?" I took a slow sip of tea. My hands didn't shake as much as I thought they would. Sophia leaned back, crossing her legs. "Do you know how ungrateful you sound? After everything we've done for you? I laughed softly. It startled all three of us. Everything you've done for me? Daniel's face flushed. Stop twisting it, Mom. We're family. Family share. You can't just cut us off. I set my cup down with care. I can, and I have. The room went very still. Outside, a gull cried somewhere above the rooftops. The kettle clicked off in the kitchen. Sophia's mouth curled. Without us, you'll die alone with your stupid recipes. There it was, the knife slipped between the ribs. I breathed in slowly, filling my lungs, and let the words settle. Then I smiled, not sweetly, but with the calm of someone who has finally stopped pretending. I'd rather die with my recipes, I said, than live as your wallet. Daniel's eyes widened. Sophia's smirk faltered. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. You think I'm afraid of being alone? I've been alone for years. Even at that table, with you beside me, I was alone. Daniel slammed his hand on the table, making the cups tremble. Stop it. You're being dramatic. No, I said, my voice steady. I'm being clear. Sophia gathered the papers, shuffling them. If you don't sign, we'll have no choice but to take legal action. You won't win. I reached for the sugar bowl, spooned a little into my tea, stirred slowly. The sound of the spoon against porcelain was delicate, deliberate. You may try, I said, but you'll find I'm not as helpless as you think. Daniel's face twisted, a mix of anger and disbelief. Why are you doing this? We're your family. I met his eyes. My son, the boy who once clutched my skirts at the market. Family doesn't bleed each other dry. Family doesn't demand signatures under threat. Family doesn't call love trash. He flinched. Sophia looked away. I stood up. This conversation is over. Sophia rose too, her heels clicking on the floor. You're making a huge mistake. I shook my head. No, I made my mistake 30 years ago when I taught you to expect without gratitude. This, I gestured to the untouched tea, the unsigned papers, is me correcting it. Daniel's shoulders slumped, then stiffened. You'll regret this, he muttered. I walked to the door and opened it wide. The afternoon light spilled in, bright and cold. Goodbye, Daniel. Goodbye, Sophia. Sophia's lips thinned. She swept past me without another word. Daniel hesitated, his eyes searching my face for something. Mercy, weakness, maybe a hint of the mother who always said yes. I gave him nothing but silence. At last, he followed his wife out. The door clicked shut behind them. I leaned against it, my palms flat against the wood. My breath came fast, shallow. The house was suddenly very quiet. I went back to the living room, sat on the sofa where they had been. The papers lay abandoned on the table. I pushed them aside and reached for my cup. The tea had gone cold. I sipped it anyway. It tasted bitter but real. I looked around the room, the paintings on the walls, the stack of cookbooks, the worn rug. For the first time, everything felt like mine. Not theirs, not ours, mine. I whispered to the empty room. I am no longer the silent shadow paying for someone else's feast. The words settled over me like a cloak, heavy but warm. Outside, the gull cried again. The sky above the sea was turning the color of pewter, and in the distance I could hear the faint chime of a wind bell from a neighbor's balcony. I sat there until the light faded, my hands around the cooling cup, my heartbeat steady. For years, I had been the background, the support theme, the invisible wallet behind their lives. But now, at last, I was visible, to myself, if not to them. The silence after they left did not last long. 3 days later, a thick envelope arrived in my mailbox. Inside, a letter on legal stationery, bold black type that made my stomach lurch. Notice of intended proceedings. My hands shook as I read. Daniel and Sophia claimed I had promised them financial control, that I was unfit to manage my own affairs. Words like incapacity and mismanagement leapt off the page, foreign and cruel. I sat at the kitchen table, letter spread before me like a poisoned meal. My heart thudded in my ears. Was this what my son had become? My adversary in ink? The phone rang. I didn't answer. I knew it would be him, or worse, her. That night, I opened the red leather notebook. The familiar creak of its spine steadied me. I flipped through decades of neat rows, numbers marching like soldiers across yellowed pages. Each line testified to the opposite of mismanagement. It was not incapacity, it was excess. Too much giving, not too little. My eyes blurred. I pressed my fingertips against the ink, as if by touching the past I could hold on to the love that once justified every euro. But love had soured. Now these numbers were my defense, not my offering. I knew I needed help. The next morning, I called a lawyer recommended by my neighbor, a retired judge. His name was Mark Leclerc, 55, with salt and pepper hair and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. In his office, I laid the letter on his desk. My voice wavered. They're trying to take everything, Mark. My own son. He read silently, then looked up. Do you have records? I opened my bag and placed the red notebook before him. He flipped through, nodding slowly. This, he said, tapping a page, is not weakness. It's evidence. For the first time in days, I felt air return to my lungs. Still, fear lingered. Walking home, I imagined neighbors whispering, imagined headlines in local papers, elderly woman stripped of assets by her own children. Shame clung to me like damp clothes. That evening, I confided in Clara, a friend from the book club I had joined the year before. Over tea in her cozy kitchen, I showed her the letter, her face flushed with outrage. Eleanor, this is monstrous. You've given them everything and now they want more? You cannot face this alone. Her words were a bomb. I wasn't alone, not entirely. The days blurred. Letters multiplied, each one colder than the last. Sophia's lawyer alleged I was forgetful, that I had a history of financial errors. Lies dressed in formal language. I kept the papers in a drawer, but their presence infected the house. At night, I heard them rustling, whispering threats. I slept poorly, rising often to pace the halls. Sometimes I caught myself listening for Daniel's voice at the door, hoping he might come alone, contrite. But he never did. Then came the shock I hadn't anticipated. One evening, sorting through the mail, I found a copy of a power of attorney document, signed, dated, notarized. My name scrawled at the bottom in shaky script. But it wasn't my handwriting. My knees buckled. I sat down hard on the stairs, paper trembling in my grip. They had forged it. My son. My son had forged my name. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. Then, slowly, my lungs filled. Anger burned through the fear, sharp and clean. So, this is what we've come to, I whispered into the empty hall. I tucked the forged document into the red notebook, a new page of evidence. At Mark's office the next day, I laid it before him. His jaw tightened. This, he said, is criminal, and it will not stand. I looked at him, my voice steady now. Then let's fight. Not every day was filled with fire. Some days, I felt the weight of years, the ache of loneliness pressing down. I doubted myself, wondered if perhaps Sophia was right, that without them, I would wither into silence, my recipes gathering dust. But then Clara would arrive with fresh bread, or my neighbor, Mr. Duval, would drop by to fix a squeaky hinge, insisting, "We're on your side, Madam Martin." Each small kindness was a thread, weaving a net beneath me. The threats escalated. Sophia called one evening, her voice sugar-coated but cutting. "You're making this hard on yourself, Eleanor. If you'd just cooperate, none of this would be necessary." I held the phone away, staring at the wall. Then I brought it back and said evenly, "No, I won't cooperate in my own destruction." I hung up before she could reply. The battle lines were drawn, papers prepared, witnesses contacted. Mark coached me on testimony, walking me through likely questions. At night, I practiced in front of the mirror, my reflection pale but determined. Mrs. Martin, why did you give so much money to your son? Mark would ask. Because I believed love was measured in sacrifice, I answered, voice firming with repetition. Do you regret it? Yes, I whispered to the mirror. But regret doesn't make me incompetent. The woman staring back at me looked older, yes, but not broken. The tension seeped into everything. The meals I cooked tasted of bitterness. The pages of my cookbooks blurred beneath tired eyes. But through it all, the red leather notebook sat on my desk, a sentinel. I opened it nightly, running my fingers over the ink. Once a symbol of love, now it was my shield. I told myself, they may strip me of illusions, but not of truth. And the truth is written here, line by line. It was late past midnight when I found it. I couldn't sleep. The house groaned with the weight of silence, and the shadows pressed too close. I wandered from room to room, aimless, until I noticed a folder half hidden beneath the armchair where Daniel had sat during his last visit. A corner of paper jutted out, just enough to catch my eye. I bent to pick it up, intending to set it aside for morning. But the folder was heavier than I expected. I carried it to the desk, switched on the lamp, and opened it. Inside, bank statements, receipts, clippings of correspondence. I turned page after page until my eyes fell on one document that froze the air in my lungs. A power of attorney, my name typed neatly across the top, and at the bottom, a signature, my signature, or rather, an imitation of it. For a moment, the room tilted. My hand clutched the desk edge, knuckles white. I lifted the paper closer, the ink catching in the lamplight. It was uncanny, almost perfect, but not mine. The loops were wrong, the pressure uneven. My body shook, but my mind cleared with terrifying sharpness. So this, I whispered, the word scraping out of me, is what my son has become. The betrayal wasn't a stab, it was a slow incision, years in the making, cutting deeper with every transfer, every lie, every silence. But this was the blade finally striking bone. I set the paper down carefully, as though it might explode. My fingers trembled, yet my eyes burned bright. The fear that had haunted me for weeks began to drain, replaced by something harder, colder. I tucked the forgery into the red leather notebook, sliding it between two pages of neat calculations. My shield grew stronger. I whispered into the stillness, I am no longer afraid of losing them, because the truth shows I lost them long ago. The days that followed were a blur of preparation. Mark's office became my second home. He spread documents across his desk like a general plotting battle. Bank statements, notarized signatures, camera records from the bank, all lined up like soldiers waiting for deployment. We will not only defend, Mark said firmly, adjusting his glasses. We will prove intent to defraud. The forged signature is our spearhead. His certainty steadied me, though dread still coiled in my stomach. At night, I stood before the mirror in my bedroom, clutching a sheet of paper as if it were testimony. The first time I tried to read aloud, my voice cracked, every word slipping away. My name is Eleanor Martin, 71 years old. The syllables stumbled, fragile as porcelain. I lowered the page, ashamed of the quiver in my tone, but I tried again. And again. Each night, the words grew surer. My reflection straightened, shoulders squaring, eyes no longer darting away. By the fourth evening, my voice rang clear. I am not incapable. I am not incompetent. I am a woman who gave too much and refuses to be erased. Clara and Mr. Duval insisted on helping. One afternoon, they came to my living room, turning it into a mock courtroom. Clara sat opposite me, playing Sophia with frightening accuracy, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Mrs. Martin, she said, mimicking, isn't it true that you often forgot to pay your own bills? My pulse raced, but I forced myself to meet her eyes. No, I kept meticulous records. Every transfer to Daniel is written in this notebook with dates and amounts. I held up the red leather book. Does that look like forgetfulness to you? They applauded when I finished. I almost laughed, the first real laugh in weeks. On the final night before court, I sat alone with the notebook open on my lap. I traced the ink grooves, remembering the young woman who had written them, believing each number was an act of love. I closed it gently. Tomorrow, those same numbers would defend me, not him. As I slipped the notebook into my bag, I whispered, I prepare for court not to defeat them, but to defeat the fear inside me. I turned off the light, and for the first time in months, I slept through the night. The courthouse smelled of marble dust and disinfectant. Light poured down from high windows, cold and unforgiving. My shoes tapped against the tiled floor as Mark and I walked the corridor. Each step echoed the sound of heels and hard soles striking stone. Inside the courtroom, the air was taut, as though everyone had inhaled and forgotten to exhale. White fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. The clerk shuffled papers, her pen tapping against the desk like a metronome. I sat at the defendant's table, my hands folded in my lap. Across the aisle, Daniel and Sophia whispered to each other. Sophia wore a tailored suit, the color of storm clouds. Daniel's tie was too tight. He tugged at it with nervous fingers. He didn't look at me. The judge entered. Everyone rose. The sound of chairs scraping against the floor was a chorus of nerves. We sat again when told, the wooden benches groaning under the weight of people and secrets. The trial began. Sophia was the first to speak. She rose gracefully, smoothing her skirt, her voice honeyed and practiced. Your Honor, she began, we are here today out of love and concern. Eleanor Martin is no longer capable of managing her finances. She has made reckless decisions, jeopardized her future, and without intervention, she risks losing everything. Her words dripped with feigned compassion. She spoke of confusion, of forgetfulness. She painted me as a fragile woman lost in her own world of outdated recipes and failing memory. She once had a brilliant career, Sophia said, glancing briefly at me with mock pity. But now she clings to notebooks and old habits, unable to adapt. We only want to protect her. Protect me. The lie stung more than the insult. Mark rose smoothly when it was our turn. He adjusted his glasses, his voice steady, deliberate. Your Honor, what my clients present as concern is, in fact, a calculated attempt to strip a woman of her autonomy. Mrs. Martin is not only capable, she is meticulous. We have decades of records to prove it. He lifted the red leather notebook from the table and held it aloft. The courtroom seemed to lean forward. In this book, Mark continued, Mrs. Spee, Martin documented every financial decision she made, dates, amounts, purposes, not the signs of a failing mind, but of extraordinary discipline. And more, we have evidence of a forged signature, an attempt to fabricate her consent for power of attorney. A ripple of sound moved through the room. The judge's brows rose. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Sophia's lips pressed into a thin line. Mark placed the forged document before the judge. Here, Your Honor, is proof of intent to deceive. The prosecution sputtered, trying to recover. Their lawyer, a tall man with an expensive watch, attempted to cast doubt. Perhaps Mrs. Martin simply forgot signing. At her age, I couldn't stay seated. I rose, my chair scraping back. My voice rang out, clearer than I expected. I am 71. I fed this family for decades. If love means emptying myself until I vanish, then that is not love. I choose to exist. The words echoed in the chamber. For once, all eyes were on me, not as a relic, not as a wallet, but as a woman speaking truth. Daniel's face reddened. Sophia's eyes narrowed, but her confidence flickered. The proceedings stretched on. Witnesses spoke. Clara testified to my clarity of mind at book club meetings. Mr. Duval, my neighbor, swore he had seen me balancing my accounts and tending my garden with precision. A bank clerk confirmed my signature on official documents, noting the stark difference from the forgery. Sophia tried to interject, her voice rising, brittle now. She doesn't know what she's doing. She's lonely. The judge silenced her with a raised hand. You will not interrupt. Mark leaned close to me, whispering, We're winning. Still, I kept my eyes down. Winning wasn't the word I wanted. I didn't feel like a warrior. I felt like a mother who had lost her son long before this courtroom. When closing arguments came, Mark stood again. Your Honor, this case is not about incapacity. It is about greed. Mrs. As about greed. Martin gave her son more than 450,000 euros over 3 decades. She kept records of every cent, and when she finally said no, they fabricated documents to take the rest. This is not protection. It is predation. He gestured toward me. She stands here not asking for anything new. She asks only to keep what is hers, to live in dignity. The room held its breath. The judge leaned forward, hands folded. His voice was measured, authoritative. After reviewing the evidence, this court finds no grounds to declare Mrs. Martin incapable. On the contrary, the records demonstrate consistent and competent management of her affairs. The forged document presented by the plaintiffs undermines their credibility and constitutes attempted fraud. He paused. The silence was a drum roll in my chest. Therefore, the court rejects all claims made by Daniel and Sophia Martin. Mrs. Eleanor Martin retains full control of her assets. Case dismissed. The gavel struck wood. The sound was final, absolute. For a heartbeat, I could not move. The words washed over me, heavy and freeing all at once. Daniel slumped, staring at the floor. Sophia muttered something sharp, but her lawyer silenced her with a hand. I gathered my bag, the red notebook tucked safely inside. My legs felt unsteady, but not weak, simply unused to carrying me without the burden of fear. As I stepped into the corridor, light flooded through the tall windows. The echoes of shoes on marble seemed different now, not ominous, but liberating. Mark touched my arm gently. You did it, Eleanor. I shook my head. We did it. But more than that, I finally did it for myself. I walked out of the courthouse, the city buzzing beyond its doors. The air tasted sharp, alive, and I thought, with a clarity that rang louder than any gavel, I leave this place not with the victory of money, but with the victory of freedom. X. We left the courthouse at noon, but the light felt like morning, new, clean, almost too bright. The steps down to the street were wider than I remembered, the air sharper. Mark shook my hand and said something kind. I nodded, heard only the cadence, not the content. My ears were full of the gavel's echo. In the taxi, I pressed my palm to the window and watched the city slide by. A florist rinsing buckets, school children in navy sweaters sprinting toward a bus, a baker setting trays of golden bread to cool. Life, indifferent to verdicts, kept going. I tried to match its rhythm and couldn't. My heart trotted at an uneven gait, tripping between relief and a hollow ache. At home, I stood in the doorway longer than necessary, keys cold in my hand. The house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and paper, yesterday's scent, not today's. I set my bag on the console and touched the red leather notebook through the canvas, as if it were a small animal I needed to reassure. I didn't take it out. Not yet. I boiled water without thinking and made tea I didn't want. Steam curled from the cup and vanished into the high kitchen light. The clock over the pantry ticked, patient as ever. I listened to it for a full minute, then another. Today, it was neither a countdown nor a beginning. It was a metronome set to the tempo of an ordinary life, a life I had to learn again. I carried the cup to the dining table and sat in the chair where Daniel used to sit. I tried to summon a version of him that would soften the air. The boy with the milk mustache, the teenager too tall for his jacket, the man who trembled when he first held his child. Memory obliged for a moment, a kind one, before dissolving into the man in a courthouse who could not meet my eyes. I took a sip. The tea tasted like clean water and something else, copper perhaps, or my own tiredness. My hands were steady. I set the cup down and walked to the living room. The late light lay across the rug in wide bars. Dust hung in the beams like tiny planets. I opened the balcony door. September air spilled in, salt sweet, and somewhere to the left a wind chime answered the breeze with a small bright ringing, the same note over and over. I leaned against the railing. A gull glided past at my eye level, one wing tilting to catch the invisible. Below, the street murmured, a scooter's snarl, a laugh, a dog's impatient nails. My body recognized the texture of the world returning to itself, away from courtrooms and signatures and oaths. And yet my insides felt like a room after a storm floor mopped, windows thrown open, the water gone, but the smell of rain still clinging to the curtains. When the phone rang, I let it. It rang out, then rang again. I turned it face down on the table and went to the bedroom to change. My court clothes, precise and careful, had the stiffness of a costume. I hung them on the back of the door and pulled on a soft sweater that smelled faintly of rosemary and starch. My shoulders dropped an inch. In the mirror, I examined my face the way a restorer studies a painting, not judging the years, only noting where the light still found something to love. My eyes were rimmed red. My mouth, relaxed at last, had the shape of a woman who had said enough. I said my name out loud, once, then again, like a key sliding into a lock. Back in the kitchen, I took the red leather notebook from my bag and set it on the table. The spine cracked like an old knuckle when I opened it to the last page, a neat column where the total still read 450,037 EUR. I traced the curve of the 7. It felt like touching a healed scar, smooth and senseless, part of me and no longer tender. I didn't add a new line. There was nothing left to record. The notebook had been a map of erosion. Now it was an artifact, not a compass. I closed it carefully and slid it onto the bookshelf between two cookbooks, a monument among recipes. The phone rang again. I picked it up and saw Daniel's name. The screen pulsed with the call as if it had a heartbeat. I let it ring until it stopped. A message arrived. I did not open it. Another followed. I still did not open it. My silence was not a weapon, but a sure, solid, patient, there to meet whatever waves chose to break. In the afternoon, Clara knocked and stepped inside carrying a paper bag from the bakery. Her face searched mine and softened. You look taller, she said. Do I? I tried to smile. Perhaps I've been tilting under the weight for so long that anything upright feels impossible. She put the bag on the counter and began to slice bread without asking. Butter, jam, 2 plates. We ate standing up like students. She talked about an author I'd never read. I listened, grateful for a voice that had nothing to do with court or kin. When she left, she squeezed my forearm twice, quick, and said, "Call me if the night is noisy." I promised I would. I did not call. The night came in quietly, as if it too were tired. I turned off the brighter lights and left the small lamp near the bookshelf on. The apartment grew rounder, gentler. I stood by the window, the glass cool to my forehead, and watched the street lamps flicker into their patient halos. Alone, yes, but not empty. I thought of the judge's voice repeating the words, "Case dismissed, full control retained," and felt the way those phrases had set down inside me, not as trumpets, but as foundations. Relief was not joy. It was the removal of the hand from the throat. Breathing was ordinary again. Ordinary felt like a miracle. I made a second cup of tea and carried it to my desk. The chair welcomed me with the soft complaint of wood familiar with my weight. I opened my laptop, not to check the news, not to reread filings, not to measure the internet's appetite for other people's pain, but to open a blank document. For a long minute, I stared at the white, my finger hovering over the keys. The cursor blinked, a heartbeat, an invitation, a metronome reset. I typed the title first, simple as bread, a soup for the first day after winning. Then I wrote, on the day you get your life back, make a broth, something with bones and patience. Peel an onion. Break the garlic with the side of your knife. Listen to the pot before you taste it. It will tell you when it's ready. Ah, the words appeared without hurry, without the need to justify themselves, like steam finding the shape of the air. When I finished the paragraph, I saved the file and closed the computer. The act had been small, but it landed in me the way a pebble lands in a pond, with rings that move outward long after the surface stills. In the bedroom, I pulled back the quilt and paused, hand on the pillow. I remembered nights from months ago, the ceiling a blank I could not stop reading, the clock an enemy. Tonight, the clock would only be a clock. I turned to the window. The wind bell on the neighbor's balcony chimed once, then fell quiet, as if to say, I'm here, you can rest. I slid into bed. The sheets were cool and smelled faintly of sun from where they had dried on the line. The space on the other side of the bed did not feel like absence, it felt like room. I lay on my back and let my bones drop their quarrel with gravity piece by piece. Jaw, shoulders, ribs, hips, knees, heels. My breath found me where I had left it, uncomplicated, regular. I did not count the years or the euros. I did not rehearse my testimony. I did not ask what Daniel would say or whether Sophia's anger would curl around a new scheme. I didn't plan. I let the present do what it knows, be exactly itself. Just before sleep, a thought came and I didn't push it away. Perhaps freedom is not the sound of doors flinging wide or fireworks over a city or a chorus of friends shouting bravo. Perhaps freedom is a hinge moving without complaint, a room that is safe enough for silence, the taste of butter on warm bread eaten with a friend, a notebook put back on the shelf. I turned off the lamp. Darkness settled, not heavy but complete. My eyes closed. The house exhaled. Somewhere far off, a motorcycle coughed. Closer, the wind bell remained still. I smiled to no one and to myself. That night I understood. Freedom isn't loud. It's a door I open and dare to walk through. I sold the house in early spring. The real estate agent had expected me to hesitate, to cling to the walls soaked with years of memory, but I didn't. I signed the papers with a steady hand. Watching her gather the keys, I felt only the faintest tug, like a hair pulled gently from a brush. My life was no longer bound to bricks and parquet floors that echoed with arguments and silences. With the money, I bought a small apartment overlooking the Mediterranean. It wasn't grand, but it had a balcony no bigger than a dining table, and from it I could see the sea stretch blue and endless, like an unwritten page. On the first night there, I unpacked only the essentials: a kettle, 2 cups, a stack of notebooks. The red leather one sat among them. I placed it at the bottom of the drawer and closed it. For the first time, I didn't need its weight to remind me of my strength. Its story was finished. Life in the new town moved differently. The air smelled of salt and thyme. Children shouted in 2 languages on the promenade. The fishmonger waved when I passed each morning, holding up gleaming sardines like silver ribbons. I signed up for a painting class at the community center. The first session, I stared at the blank canvas for nearly 20 minutes before daring a stroke of blue. The brush shook, but the line held. The instructor, a wiry man with paint on his trousers, leaned over and said, "The sea forgives every mistake." I smiled. I wanted to believe him. Soon I found myself staying late, painting, until my hands were smudged with ochre and teal. I wasn't good, not yet, but it didn't matter. For once, creation wasn't about perfection. It was about seeing the world through my own eyes again. I also began to write, not the transfer records of old, not the mechanical figures of sacrifice. I wrote recipes. Recipes I had carried in my body for decades. Soups thick with lentils, pastries that flaked at the touch, the lamb roasted with rosemary that Sophia had once called trash. I opened a simple food blog. The first post I titled Broth for the First Day After Winning. S. I uploaded a photograph, my ham stirring a pot, steam curling like calligraphy. To my surprise, strangers began to comment. This tastes like my grandmother's kitchen. I tex averred thassis triers of resses, I tex averred teas. Each comment was a thread stitching me back into a fabric I thought I'd lost. I wasn't a wallet, wasn't an artifact. I was a voice, still alive, still worth hearing. One morning, I woke before dawn. The sea was still dark, the horizon only a bruise of light. I brewed coffee and carried it to the balcony. The cup was warm between my palms. I had hung a small wind chime there the day before, a gift from Clara, who had visited and insisted my new home needed music in the air. As the breeze stirred, it rang, a gentle ting, ting, delicate but insistent. I froze. For years, the ting-shi of my phone had meant another withdrawal, another loss. That sound had once sent shivers of dread through my body. But here now, the chime's ting-ka floated free in the morning air, light as gull feathers. Not obligation, not fear, freedom. I closed my eyes and let it wash through me. The sea murmured below, the coffee's aroma rose, and the chime kept singing, a note that belonged to no one but me. My days filled with new rhythms, mornings for writing, and afternoons for painting, evenings for walks along the quay where fishermen mended their nets and old women sat shelling beans, gossiping in voices that carried like birdsong. I grew close to a small circle of friends from class. We met for meals, each of us bringing a dish. I laughed again, real laughter, not the brittle chuckle I used to offer at tense family dinners. Once, when someone asked about my past, I hesitated, then said simply, I spent many years giving too much. Now I'm learning to give differently. Ideas. They nodded, no judgment, and passed me the bread. There were nights I still woke to dreams of Daniel as a boy. I'd hear his small voice, fight just one more, Mom. I'd see his hands, sticky with jam, reaching for mine. Waking, I'd press my palm to my heart and whisper, I hope you find peace wherever you are. And then I would let the dream drift away like foam on the tide. I no longer needed him to return. My love for him remained, but it no longer bound me to pain. One afternoon, I sat with Mark at a cafe overlooking the marina. He had come to visit on his way to another case. His hair was grayer now, but his eyes still sharp. You look different, he said, stirring his espresso. How so? Lighter. As if you put something heavy down and forgot where. I smiled. I know exactly where, in a drawer, under old papers. And I don't need to lift it again. He nodded, satisfied. The seasons turned. Spring greened into summer. My blog gained readers, thousands, then tens of thousands. Some asked for a book. The idea thrilled and terrified me. Could I gather my recipes and stories into something permanent? One evening, I laid out notebooks on the table. Not just the red one, but the blank ones too. For every page of loss I had once written, I had a new page of creation waiting. I began to write with both hands, one reclaiming the past, one shaping the future. And then came the morning that sealed everything. I sat on the balcony with my coffee. The sea glittered like glass scattered with diamonds. The wind blew soft, and the chime began its song. I looked out and thought, this is it. Not the courtroom, not the verdict, not even the applause of strangers online. This coffee, sea, wind is the real victory. The phone lay on the table beside me. It buzzed once, a number I didn't recognize. I turned it over, silenced it, and set it aside. The chime kept ringing, drowning out the ghostly buzz with its light, free music. I lifted the cup, let the steam curl into my face, and breathed deeply. In that moment, I knew the truth as surely as I knew the taste of coffee on my tongue. I had lost a greedy family, but I had found a life of peace, closed like a well-loved book. I want to end this story by speaking to you directly. not as a witness in a courtroom, not as a food writer or teacher, not even as a mother who once gave too much. I want to speak as a woman who has lived through loss, through betrayal, and through the quiet miracle of beginning again. If one day your loved ones call your love worthless, will you stay silent or will you rise? That question has followed me like a shadow. For years, I stayed silent. I believed patience would soften cruelty, that money could purchase affection, that sacrifice was the same as love. But silence grows heavy, and one day it becomes unbearable. I am not here to tell you what choice to make. I can only tell you what silence did to me and what rising gave back. When I pressed cancel on that automatic transfer, my hand shook. When I said no across the tea table, my voice almost cracked. When I walked into the courtroom, my knees felt weak, but each trembling act became stronger in memory. What once felt like breaking apart became a kind of forging. If you have read this far, then you too have carried something heavy. Perhaps it is not money. Perhaps it is time or dignity or the way you keep saying yes when your soul longs to say no. I cannot reach across the page to hold your hand, but I can leave these words with you. You are allowed to draw the line. You are allowed to keep yourself whole. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. Every sentence I wrote, I imagined someone on the other side of it, someone who needed to know they weren't alone in the dark. Maybe that someone is you. Remember, you deserve love, not exploitation. No matter your age, your history, or your mistakes, that truth does not expire. If my story has stirred something in you, don't let it fade when you close the page. Share it. Pass it on, not for my sake, but for those who still think they are alone, who still believe their only worth is what they can give away. Share this story so others can find the courage to draw their own boundaries. And when the day comes, because it will, when someone tries to tell you your love is trash, I hope you hear a different sound. Not the heavy buzz of a demand, not the chime of obligation, but the wind moving through your own open door, carrying the small, steady note of freedom. That note is waiting for you. Rise and claim it.